Does Pope Francis deny the existence of hell? Stick around to find out.
You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debate. You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussions, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Reason and Theology. We're asking the question, does Pope Francis deny the existence of hell? This has been a topic that has been discussed for quite a while now, especially from 2018 unto the present, and it's coming up again. I want to use this as an example of some of the problems that I see in the church today. I've voiced and expressed some of my concerns with the current pontificate, but in this video, what I'm going to do is express my concerns with those who are analyzing the current pontificate. Let me share my screen and show you where this is coming from. So recently there is a Twitter post by Timothy Gordon where he asks, have the Pope splainers ever tried to make up a tacked on pretext for no one can be condemned forever because this is not the logic of the Gospels? I've already done a show addressing that, so I'm not going to, give the answer here. But Eric Ibarra made a comment here. And yesterday, Timothy Gordon, in the video that I reviewed, tried to interact with Eric, but then he says that he admits that he doesn't really understand what Eric was saying. So I'll leave that between them to discuss. But I was curious because I went and looked at it because I was just curious what all Eric said and what Timothy Gordon said. And evidently they did not continue the discussion beyond this. But I just was looking through the comments and I saw this one. Given Pope Francis does not believe in the existence of hell, I would suspect it's the former, not the latter. Now, I don't know who this person is, but they're just an example of how common these kinds of claims are. We hear it so often that Pope Francis denies the existence of hell. It's just kind of taken as a dogma today. And it's like once you hear something repeated so often, you really, a lot of people just begin to believe it and take it by faith that it's true. And what happens is whenever we're going through social media on a daily basis, we're seeing stuff like this all day long. And what happens over the course of several years where we're encountering claim after claim after claim about Pope Francis and we're not thinking critically? Well, what's probably going to happen is you're eventually going to develop an impression that Pope Francis is just denying this dogma after that dogma after that dogma after that dogma. And because we're not looking further into the situation, we're just kind of taking what we see on social media for granted. We develop this impression that could be a misimpression to a certain extent about Pope Francis. I've said again, there are some legitimate concerns about Pope Francis, and there are some accurate reports about legitimate concerns about Pope Francis. But again, some of this should not be taken for granted. And I unfortunately think that many of us are doing that, so that then begins to form an impression. So whenever you have people like myself who come and say, hey, wait, I think we need to think a little bit more critically. I think we shouldn't take that for granted. You'll immediately get slammed as a Pope splainer. How dare you? Where have you been for the last 10 years? It's just so clear. And well, actually, it's not so clear. What it is that you just haven't been using critical thinking skills in a lot of these scenarios. You've just kind of taken it for granted. And so you have this emotional impression about Pope Francis, which is more based on what people are telling you on social media than it is through I've critically examined in the most charitable way what Pope Francis has said, and here's what it is. That's what we're going to do today with this scenario. Because again, I think it's indicative of this problem overall. I'm just using it as an example. There's many, many other examples about people saying, well, Pope Francis says this and he believes that. And when you look further into it, it's not that clear cut. So what I'm trying to do is say, okay, I'm going to use this as an example to say, look, I think we need to pump the brakes, slow down. And whenever we're going through social media, Think more critically. Don't take things for granted. Don't read comments like this and just immediately assume that it's true. I like this. Look at what Hold the Tradition says. He immediately gives him an example of the exact opposite that Pope Francis has said. Um, what and I've heard like Steve Skojec, who has gone to agnosticism at this point, not atheism, but he is agnostic. But he used to say, well, Pope Francis is engaging in what was this Parolin, I think, the Parolin effect or something like that. I forget for sure who it was, but it's this idea that you effectively affirm two contradictory propositions, um, and you're deliberately doing so. And so that was the theory that they kind of came up with. So it's like, okay, well, Pope Francis is saying that he believes in hell here, but then over here, he's allegedly saying he doesn't believe in hell. So rather than harmonizing these things, I'm just going to say that, okay, well, he's using this tactic, this communist tactic where you affirm two contradictory propositions and you start to get into these wild, fanciful interpretations rather than just say, I wonder if actually one of these reports is inaccurate. You would rather believe something as unreasonable as, well, he's using this communist tactic, then maybe one of these reports is, again, inaccurate, which is certainly the case in this situation. So, he quotes this, and I want to go to the actual report, or at least one of the reports about it from Time. We got our good old rainbow colors up here on Time. Okay, so Time is one of these places that's reporting it. There were many others. Obviously this is a secular source, but there were plenty of others that reported it as well. I just pulled up one randomly. Here's what it says. Pope Francis attended an annual vigil for mafia victims Friday, and this was back in 2014. So this is like the early beginning of his pontificate. And warned mobsters to change their ways or risk going to hell. I remember the pastor of Auburn Avenue, which is famous for Auburn Avenue Presbyterian Church. That is, again, famous for initiating the whole federal vision controversy and Presbyterianism. I remember one time in one of his videos, he was like, why doesn't the Pope condemn the mob? And that was his main objection against Catholicism. it was so weird. It's like, I've never heard that as somebody's main objection against Catholicism, but that was his main objection. And whenever I saw this report in 2014, I thought, I wonder if he's going to consider converting to Catholicism now. Of course he didn't. Okay, so it says, let's see. And here we have it in the chat. We have a commenter. Francis does not believe in sin or hell. Okay, well, thank you for your spreading of misinformation there. But yeah, that's you're completely wrong about that, and the facts demonstrate that you're wrong. So rather than engaging in this kind of rash judgment, which if you're wrong about that, that would be a sin, by the way. You might want to pump the brakes on that and be a little less dogmatic, and also think more critically. You're a perfect example of what I'm trying to work against and show that there's a real problem today, and you're part of that problem. So thank you for demonstrating that for us today. Okay, so here it is. He says, this life that you live now won't give you pleasure. It won't give you joy or happiness, he said, the Associated Press reports. Blood-stained money, blood-stained power. You can't bring it with you to your next life. These are quotes here, direct quotes. Repent, Pope Francis said in his most forceful denouncement of organized crime to date. Quote, there is still time to not end up in hell, which is what awaits you if you continue on this path. I kind of wish Pope Francis was like this with also some of the some of the other people that need to hear this message into the in the church today, not just mobsters, but there's others who need to hear this kind of fire and brimstone preaching from the Pope. So my criticism of Pope Francis is, okay, well, don't just tell that to the mobsters. There's some others even in the church today that need to hear that message. With all due respect, Holy Father, and I think you should call them out, but it is what it is. But hey, you know what? At least he is very clear here. Mobsters, you're gonna go to hell if you don't repent. Okay, so that's clear. It's a direct quote. I haven't seen anybody, demonstrate that this is completely false or something. Um, there we go. It's very clear he's speaking on the subject. Now, what you do have is this other thing where back in 2018, you have this interview with Scalfari, who doesn't take notes. He's really old, and he reports Pope Francis as saying, hell does not exist. So it says apparently the fiery 93-year-old avowed atheist reporter Eugenio Scalfari of La Repubblica set the social media world aflame after writing in Italian that when asked about the fate of bad souls, the pontiff responded, quote, hell does not exist. So this is a quote based on his memory without any kind of notes. Hell does not exist. Now, I don't believe that Pope Francis actually said that because it's very clear that he does believe in the existence of hell. However, I do think that he said something to that effect that the atheists interpreted in this way. I think that Pope Francis sometimes says some things that sound shocking. And it's like, well, when you look into it, okay, that's true. But I think he's doing it for rhetorical effect. I think he probably said something to Scalfari that sounded like he was saying hell does not exist. And it's like if we knew exactly what he said, it would be one of those things. It's like, okay, yeah, that technically checks out, but you're clearly just saying it to be provocative to prove a point to Scalfari. And okay, that's legitimate to an extent. Like when Jesus says, call no man father, right? He's not really saying you can't call your father father, or you can't even call a spiritual leader father. But he's just kind of using that hyperbole for rhetorical effect to prove a point. That's probably what Pope Francis is doing. So I don't think that Scalfari was getting this from nowhere. I don't think he was just making that up. I think Scalfari heard something from Pope Francis and he was really trying to report it. But as an atheist, he probably didn't have the theological chops to really understand what Pope Francis was saying. And so he just interpreted it as hell does not exist. That's probably what went on. But the problem is people just see this and they just say, oh, see, he denies the existence of hell. And they don't consider, but wait, he actually elsewhere is clear about he does believe the existence of hell. And this is just one example. There's others. So you can't just take this for granted and just say he's just point blank saying that. No, he probably just said something for rhetorical effect that again, it checks out theologically, but it sounds like this idea of hell does not exist. And of course, it could have been something like in the context of they're talking about a specific kind of hell, and he's saying hell does not exist. It like understood in that way. But there is a different kind of hell, and a different understanding. There's a lot of ways in which this could have taken place, but I'm sure there was something that Pope Francis said that was very rhetorical and he interpreted in that way. But I'm sure also that it doesn't conflict with what he was saying here. So we don't have to go to these little fanciful interpretations of, well, this is a communist tactic where he's trying to say that, he goes and says one thing to here to that group, and then he says something else completely contradicting it to that group, and he's doing this as a communist plot. No wonder people end up going agnostic once they've embraced this kind of wild conspiracy theory interpretations. No wonder they end up leaving the church. That's a whole lot less reasonable than the idea that, well, no, he probably just said something really rhetorical to Scalfari and Scalfari misunderstood it. Now, there is some culpability on Pope Francis, because my thing is, they come back and say the Holy Office or the Vatican said what is reported by the author in today's article is the fruit of his reconstruction, in which the precise words of the Pope are not cited. No quotations in the aforementioned article then should be considered as a faithful transcription of the words of the Holy Father. It's like, okay, that's helpful, but still that's not good enough. If I were the Pope, I would have come out and said, no, but here's exactly what I said. Here's what I meant. Here's how he misunderstood it. And by the way, Scalfari, if you're going to just put out stuff like that that's misrepresenting me, I'm not going to continue to do interviews with you. That is what I would have done. But so can we legitimately criticize Pope Francis for going back to Scalfari and for not giving that kind of clarity? Yes, I think we can. But I also think I kind of am starting to understand where Pope Francis is coming from when he doesn't do that. I think I kind of understand why. Let me give you an example from my own personal experience, my tiny personal experience, and I am sure it applies infinitely more to Pope Francis. I have a little tiny channel and a little tiny reach, and Pope Francis has the reach of the entire world and is visible to the entire world. So I'm going to take something that I've observed in my own life, and I can imagine it's that much more heightened for him, a figure like him, a world figure. So what I noticed is people. It was usually the rad trads, and it's still usually the rad trads. Um, Also, you have some of the ortho bros who do this as well. Um, I began to notice how people would take things that I said and completely misrepresent them and start to spread um, false rumors about me, false things that I said. I'll give you an example. I'll give you three examples. And I'll tell you how it ties into this with Pope Francis and him not clarifying himself sufficiently in some cases. Um, I noticed whenever I did a video noting that the issue with Pachamama, as imprudent and scandalous as I think it was, I noted that people who are accusing Pope Francis of idolatry, I said that that's unreasonable because in the video they directly call the image Our Lady of the Amazon. So they in the video they directly believed that this was Mary that they were venerating. So you can't accuse it of them of idolatry. I pointed that out. And because I pointed that out, I immediately got called by a pretty well-known YouTuber, has about 100,000 subscribers or something like that. Immediately got called by him on social media as a demon worship defender. And I thought, well, that's weird because I don't defend demon worship and I don't defend idol worship. So there's no way in which anybody could ever say that I'm defending demon worship. And they're completely not accounting for, again, what they say in the video when they call it Our Lady of the Amazon. So to call me a demon worship defender after I was so careful to explain, first of all, I think this is scandalous. Shouldn't have been done, but you can't accuse him of worshiping an idol, therefore a demon, because they directly call it Our Lady of the Amazon. You have to grapple with that. And I responded to the issue about Pope Francis later on calling him the Pachamama and how we deal with that as well. And so um, I was very careful to explain all this, but immediately I got labeled a demon worshiper. And I thought, that's weird. Huh. Okay, so I guess people are just going to completely ignore everything that I said and go and engage in slander. So, okay. All right, I move on. And then I was also talking to a really well-known rad trad YouTube apologist, really, 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 really well known. And I sent him my information about some of my writings on limbo. And he came back and I clearly didn't understand what I wrote, completely misinterpreted what I wrote, and thought that I was effectively defending Balthazar's thesis, that the Dare We Hope thesis, or something similar to it in reference to limbo. And I'm just thinking, there's no way you could actually come away from that if you've read what I wrote, and the individual claimed to have read what I wrote, and did show some awareness of what I wrote. So I just thought, well, I guess you read what I wrote, but you didn't understand any of it, and you immediately came to that conclusion. Um, okay, that's weird. Um, hmm. So you think I'm defending the Balthazar thesis? Okay. Maybe there's some rash judgment here. Um, Moved on, and then I was talking to another really famous rad trad YouTuber who has a great deal of influence, and he was going to have me on his channel. to talk about limbo. Um, and he had my writings on this, but evidently he didn't read them. He asked me to come on to his channel to talk about limbo. He invited me, and I said, okay, yeah, that's fine. I don't agree with this individual, but I'm certainly willing to talk about the topic of limbo. Sure, let's do it. And then I got a cancellation from him saying, "Oh no, I can't have you on the show." And the reason why is I was told that you deny limbo, and that's just not a good fit for my channel. And I'm thinking, and I just wrote back to him, so you're going based on what someone told you, and you didn't bother to actually read what I wrote, because I actually believe in limbo, and I even wrote about that. So if you took 2 minutes to actually read what I'm saying, I'm not denying limbo in any kind of way. What are you talking about? Um, you didn't give me the judgment of charity. You immediately took somebody else's word, and you didn't even ask me, and you're immediately canceling without saying, "Hey, is this your position?" So I just said, "You know what? I'm not really interested anyway, if that's the kind of person you are, that you would just rashly judge a person and not even ask them, 'Hey, can you clarify this?'" The reason why I'm putting this out is I've noticed it was those same figures, those same individuals and people in their circles. I noticed when they started to rashly misjudge me, I started to ask the question, are they doing this with others? Are they doing this with Pope Francis? I started to ask that question. And what I realized was in some cases, they were accurate about Pope Francis. So they weren't always rashly judging him, or at least it just so happened in their rash judgments that they happened to be correct. But in many cases, they were rashly judging the Pope. I began to notice it was those same people who were doing that to me that I started to look into it, and they were doing the same thing to Pope Francis, and that made me have to put the brakes on some of my criticisms of Pope Francis and say, look, I need to look at things more critically, because I've kind of been, taking their assessment on some of these things, and I need to look a little bit more critically at Pope Francis without their assessment, not in light of their assessment, because I noticed how rash they were in judging me and didn't even give me an opportunity to explain myself. Um, and when I do explain myself, maybe completely ignored what I said. So might they have been doing the same thing to others? And lo and behold, they were doing that to others, like Pope Francis and others who were bishops in the church. And so I thought, okay, that's telling. That's telling. And I started to examine some of the situations, and then I realized that I had rashly also misjudged Pope Francis in some cases. Um, so again, that made me start to question things and think more critically, and questioned the judgment of some of these individuals, because if they do this to me, they're probably doing it to others. So I say all that to say, for a while I would respond to this garbage, to the liars and to the slanderers. I would respond and say, here's the truth. But I then began to realize it was so pervasive with the rad trads slandering me and saying things about me, and among the orthobros. It became so prevalent, so common, that I realized if I'm going to respond to all this, it will be a full-time job. I'll literally have to just do nothing but defend myself every single day as a full-time job. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be here defending myself every single day against liars and slanderers. I'm not going to do that. If a person engages in evil suspicion and they fail to give the judgment of charity, that's their problem. And I'm not going to sit here and respond to every single one of these people. And if somebody believes these people who are engaging in evil suspicion and rashly judges me and concludes something false about me, which many people have, that's on them. It's not on me to go and correct every single one of these people, because that would be impossible to do. So in the majority of cases, I don't respond to this stuff. Every now and then I'll say something to respond, but the vast majority of cases, I just feel like I'm not going to do it, because it'll be nothing but a full-time job, and I won't be able to accomplish anything else. I'm going to do nothing but address these people. And meanwhile, I'm not actually addressing more important issues. So I just stopped doing it. Now, That's me, very small individual on YouTube. Can you imagine Pope Francis? How much slander he gets? How many people misjudge him? Now, sometimes, again, they're fair in their criticisms of him, but a lot of times they're misjudging him and they're misreporting him and slandering him. Not all times, but sometimes enough for it to be significant. Can you imagine how often that happens with Pope Francis as a world figure? Can you imagine how often that happens? Um, I bet he's kind of come to the point where he feels the same way. Like, I'm not going to continue to respond to these trolls. I'm not going to respond to these people engaging in evil suspicion. And instead, what he does is he preaches homilies about how rigid these people are and how they're Pharisees. And you know what? He's actually right. They are Pharisees and they are rigid. And they do find themselves in under a lot of condemnations from Scripture. He's referring to those people. He's not talking about people who prefer tradition and like the beauty of the liturgy. He's not talking about those people. He's talking about the people who do this kind of stuff. They love and value a beautiful liturgy, but then they will go and slander you and lie about you publicly. And it's like you're focused on a particular form of a liturgy, but you have no problem engaging in mortal sin or a grave sin. No issue for you. But, you know, that sounds kind of pharisaical. So I think that's probably where Pope Francis is coming from and not responding to this stuff and not giving enough clarity. My pushback to that, if that's the truth, is I understand that you don't, Holy Father, that you're not going to respond to all of these slanderers. I totally get that. But maybe deal with the really big ones, right? Like this one, I think was a really big one. And it would have taken like 2 minutes to just, clear this up more than what the Vatican press did. Just take a few more minutes to tell us what you did say and explain where you were coming from, and we can just put this behind us. Maybe address the really, 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 really big ones, and some of the other smaller stuff, just ignore them. Yeah, ignore them. The petty accusations from the recent apostolic letter, saying that Pope Francis is denying the Council of Trent. I would ignore those people. Now you do have a few bishops on there, so maybe it would be prudent for him to respond to those as individuals. But the rest of them, I would ignore them. That's just a petty accusation, and there's just so many of those that I would probably not respond. But so, again, some of the more bigger ones, yeah, maybe address those. And some might say, well, this is big enough to address. Okay, well, maybe it is. Maybe it's big enough for him to address since a few bishops signed off. So maybe he should just respond and say, here's what it is. Here's what I meant. And here's why you're being uncharitable. Maybe. But I can also understand why he wouldn't. Because after a while, when you're a public figure, you get tired of addressing slanderers and liars. You get tired of it. It's like you can't do that. It's just a full-time job. And again, imagine Pope Francis. That's probably where he's coming from. So whenever we're quick to say, oh, well, he should say this, he should come out and clarify. I get it. Maybe in some cases he should do that more. But I think I understand where he's coming from by not doing so, because he's kind of like, look, I've already been clear that I believe on hell back in 2014. So you're just being uncharitable whenever you say I don't. I already have affirmed it. So why do I even need to respond to you at this point? That's maybe where he's coming from. And again, you might make a case that, but Holy Father, you need to do that because Calfari is saying this and people are really believing it. And really need to clarify this further more than the Vatican press did. I sympathize with that view. Yeah, maybe in this case, do that. But certainly not in the majority of the cases. And I think we need to, again, keep that in mind. Whenever we're going through social media, we read people say this or that about Pope Francis, think more critically. Realize that some of the impressions that we have about Pope Francis is not formed as much from what he's actually said, but is more formed from what people are saying on social media. In some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases. And also keep in mind, one of the reasons why Pope Francis may not respond to some of the stuff is not because he knows he's guilty and he did say this and he knows that he's rejecting the gospel or something like that, or rejecting a dogma. No, maybe what it is he's tired of addressing slanderers who are engaging in evil suspicion and failing to give the judgment of charity. That could very well be what it is. I mean, as a world figure, I can only imagine how much he gets that every single day. And again, I can just start to scroll through social media right now, and I can find at least 20 examples within the next 2 minutes of people slandering Pope Francis and being uncharitable to him. Is there room for legitimate criticism of Pope Francis? Yeah. But is the majority of the stuff that we're seeing online legitimate? Probably not. Not when you look at it critically. All right. So I hope this was helpful. I hope y'all enjoy this. If y'all want to see more content like this, let me know. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Of course, check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology if you want to support me. All right. See you later. God bless.
Oh wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.